Today's story is The Honeymakers by Gail Gibbons. Honeybees travel to and from the hive. Their earliest ancestors lived about 80 million years ago. And the scientist's name for a honeybee comes from the Latin words Apis mellifera, meaning honey bearer. Honeybees are social creatures and they form highly structured groups called colonies. And in a colony, as many as 50,000 honeybees could live together and they each work and have their own special job. Now, many honeybees like to make their homes in the dark, enclosed places. Often a colony of wild honeybees builds its hive in a hollow tree. Honeybees are cared for today by beekeepers, and they live in box-shaped wooden hives. Inside the beehive, the honeybees are building amazing structures called honeycombs. It's made up of countless six-sided cells. Stored in many of these wax cells is the food that bees and people love to eat. Honey. 3 different kinds of honeybees live inside the beehives. There's only one queen bee. There are about 100 male drones and thousands of female worker bees. And like all insects, bees have 3 body parts. There's the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Honeybees have other parts too. They have antennae, they have feelers, they have large wings, and of course a stinger. Now, the queen is the largest of the honeybees, and she can live the longest, from 3 to 5 years, which is pretty long. All the other bees in the colony live for about 2 months. Except over the winter when they live for a few months longer. It is the queen's job to make sure that the hive never runs out of bees. And to do this, she leaves the hive to mate with her drones. And when she lays as many as 2,000 eggs in a single day, the drones are usually smaller than the queen, and their only job is to mate with the queen and make sure that more bees can be born. Now, most cells in the beehive are used for storing honey, but some are used for the queen to store her eggs. These are called brood cells, and in each brood cell, a bee will develop and grow. The largest brood cells are queen brood cells, and they're also called royal cells. Drone brood cells are smaller, and even smaller are the worker brood cells. The eggs of those cells will become worker bees, and although all the worker bees are female, they do not lay eggs. Instead, they do the work of the beehive. Most eggs the queen lays are no bigger than the period at the end of this sentence. And after 3 days, the larvae hatch from each one of them, and for the next 3 days, worker bees called nurse bees will feed the larvae bee milk, and then they feed them bee bread, and finally the queen larva is fed the royal jelly throughout its growth. This helps it get really big. Now each larva grows quickly. Then it spins a silky cocoon around itself. And inside this cocoon, a pupa develops. A nurse bee seals the cell with wax. Little by little, the pupa changes. It begins to look more like an adult insect. The process is called metamorphosis. And queens develop about 16 days from the time the eggs are laid. The metamorphosis of drones and workers takes about 21 to 24 days. And finally, after the transformation is complete, an adult bee chews its way out of the brood cell, and it becomes an adult honeybee. This honeybee is a worker bee, and from the minute she comes out of her brood cell, she is as busy as a bee. For the next 3 weeks, she will have a number of difficult jobs to do. First, she's a house bee, cleaning and polishing the cells. And about 3 days later, she'll become a nurse bee. After 10 days of being a nurse bee, she gets up being promoted to a wax making bee. Then she makes flakes of wax for her abdomen and chews them to mold new cells or to repair old ones. Wax making bees are also in charge of storing the nectar and pollen that other honeybees bring back from the hive. Other worker bees care for the queen. They are her court. The cluster around the queen continually feed her and groom her, making sure she's always taken care of. Now, after about a week later, wax-making bees become guard bees. These are the kinds we know about because they have stingers. They protect the hive and they chase away intruders with their stingers. They also alert other bees by spreading a special scent when there's danger. A guard bee will sometimes die in battle to protect the hive and the honey inside. The worker bee is now about 3 weeks old. She's ready to become a forager bee. Now, a forager bee is the last job, but a very important one. The forager bees are the bees that you see zipping around from flower to flower, getting all of the sweet juices called nectar. They get this from the flowers, and they use it for honey making. And at each flower, the forager bee collects nectar with her proboscis, and she stores the nectar on a special part of her body called the crop, or the honey stomach. This stomach is separate from her other stomach, and as she goes from flower to flower, she comes in contact with the yellow powder called pollen. Some of the new pollen is collected in little baskets formed by the special hairs on her hind legs. And as the forager bee collects nectar, she carries pollen from one flower to another, and this is the process called pollination. When she has visited many flowers and her crop is full, she has a beeline back to her hive. Back inside the hive, the forager bee brings up or regurgitates the nectar. Then she transfers it by the tongue to a hive bee. The nectar is passed by tongue among the hive bees until some of the moisture is gone. Then the wax-making bee places the nectar on the honey cell. There, it will continue to dry. More and more nectar is added to the honey cell, and house bees cluster over the cell and fan their wings to evaporate even more moisture in the nectar. As the nectar loses water, it becomes thicker and thicker, and finally the wax-making bees cap or seal the cell with wax, and slowly the nectar ripens into honey. When the forager bees return to their hive, they have a special way of telling other forager bees of important discoveries, like a new location of flowers full of nectar and pollen. They do dances for the bees. These dances tell the bees where to go. The forager honeybees can visit up to 10,000 flowers in a day. And all of the nectar she collects in her entire life can make up only about 1 teaspoon of honey. And to make 1 pound of honey, it takes nectar from over 1 million flowers. Also, different kinds of honey come from different kinds of flowers. Honeybees have always been valued for the honey they make. For thousands of years, people have stolen honey from wild beehives. People became beekeepers when they began to make their own hives. Some used hollow logs, others used clay pots, and later, about 1500s, the European beekeepers started using upside-down basket hives called skips. And then, about 1850, the hanging, movable frame beehive was invented. This is what we use today. On top of the bee hill is a modern beehive. The beehive is stacked in sections, and each section hangs about 10 wooden frames where the bees build their honeycombs. Now, to help the bees build their honeycombs faster, the beekeeper places wax foundations in the frames. Just trying to help them do it a little quicker. When it's time for the beekeepers to harvest the honey, the honeybees have several months to build and fill the honeycombs. The colder winters, the more food they will need. The beekeepers move slowly around the hive, They wear special clothes and use special equipment to protect themselves from getting stung. Back at home, in a shed, the beekeepers use a hot knife to cut the wax caps off. Then the honeycomb frame is placed inside an extractor. It spins around at a high speed, removing all of the honey without breaking the honeycomb. The honey goes into a collecting tank. Next, the honey is filtered through a screen on a cloth and is used to remove small pieces of wax. Then the honey is packed in airtight jars, and sometimes beekeepers melt down old and damaged honeycombs to make beeswax candles and other things. The rest of the empty honeycomb frames are returned to the hive for the honeybees to fill again the next year. And for some beekeepers, honey is making a hobby. They use the honey themselves or give it away as gifts. Commercial keepers, although, use this to provide stores and shops with gleaming jars of honey. The product they sell is delicious sweet honey from the honey makers. Oh, the end of a busy bee